Have you ever watched your tomato plants bloom beautifully, only to find them not setting any fruit, or seen your cucumbers stubbornly turn yellow instead of ripening? The internet, of course, immediately offers hundreds of miracle solutions. Drip some iodine, feed them yeast, spray them with milk. It seems like your medicine cabinet and kitchen are packed with all the secrets to a bumper crop. But what really works, and what's just a complete waste of time and precious resources? We decided it's time to put an end to the guesswork. In this video, we're going to conduct a real investigation and debunk the most popular garden myths. We took control groups of plants and rigorously tested 20 of the most famous home remedies on them. You might be shocked to discover which ones are not only utterly useless, but can actually harm your garden. Alright, let's kick off our myth-busting session. And first up, we have the undisputed king of garden myths, iodine for increased fruit set. You've probably heard this one. Just add 2 or 3 drops of iodine to a bucket of water, spray your tomatoes, and you'll have fruit galore. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? The argument usually goes like this. Iodine is an important micronutrient that supposedly stimulates the plant's metabolism and helps it produce more fruit. We decided to put this to the test. We took 2 control groups of tomatoes, all the same variety, growing under identical conditions. The first group we treated with that magic solution, 3 drops of pharmacy-grade iodine per 10 litres of water. We applied it to the leaves as advised online, once every 2 weeks. The second group, our control, simply received regular water. At first, we didn't see any difference. Both groups flowered similarly, but after a couple of weeks, we started noticing alarming changes specifically in the first, iodine group. The leaves on the treated plants looked stunted, and some even started to yellow slightly around the edges. Growth clearly slowed down compared to the control group. And most importantly, the number of fruit sets not only didn't increase, but actually decreased. So what went wrong? It's simple. Iodine is indeed necessary for plants, but only in microscopic trace amounts. Those 2 or 3 drops per bucket are already a massive toxic overdose. The plant suffers chemical stress, and if applied to the roots, it causes root burn. It's no longer focused on flowering or producing fruit. It's using all its energy just to survive. Our verdict: this first myth is a dangerous one. Using iodine in the dosages found online does not increase fruit set. Instead, it stunts the plant and reduces your potential yield. Don't risk your tomatoes for such questionable advice. Moving on to the second entry on our list, yeast. Often touted as a universal growth stimulant, the recipe for this elixir seems to constantly circulate across various gardening forums. The instructions are simple. Take a packet of yeast, add a little sugar, dissolve it in warm water, let it sit, and then water everything you own. The promises are grand. Incredible root development, lush green foliage, and naturally a record-breaking harvest. At first glance, the logic seems sound. Yeast are living fungi. They produce B vitamins and plant hormones, which should, theoretically, stimulate plant growth. For our experiment, we used pepper seedlings. Again, we divided them into 2 groups. One group was watered with this yeast solution every 10 days. The second, our control group, received plain settled water. Initially, the results were quite promising. The pepper plants in the yeast group did seem to grow a bit more actively, and their leaves appeared slightly darker. We started to wonder, could this popular myth actually be true? However, the real story unfolded about a month later. The seedlings we had been feeding with yeast started to look worse. They became leggy, their stems thinner, and their leaves paler. Meanwhile, the control group developed steadily, remaining sturdy and healthy. So, what went wrong? Here's the crucial detail, the hidden pitfall. Once introduced to the soil, yeast fungi begin to multiply rapidly. And like all living organisms, they need nutrients to survive and thrive. They ravenously consume potassium and calcium from the soil. So, instead of feeding our plants, we essentially introduced millions of hungry competitors. The plants then suffered from a severe deficiency of crucial elements. essential for strong stems and robust root development. Our verdict: yeast feeding is a myth, and it leads to the opposite of the desired effect. You're not fertilizing, you're depleting your soil, stripping your plants of vital potassium and calcium. Any short-term growth spurt is quickly followed by nutrient starvation and weakened seedlings. This gardening hack is officially debunked. Myth number 3. Aspirin for plant immunity. This story sounds almost like something out of a sci-fi novel. The belief is that aspirin, or more precisely, acetyl salicylic acid, acts like a vaccine for plants. Spray your tomatoes or cucumbers with it, and they'll supposedly activate their internal defense mechanisms, becoming invulnerable to fungal diseases like late blight or powdery mildew. There's a theoretical basis behind this. Salicylic acid is indeed a natural plant hormone involved in immune responses. We decided to put this to the test. Could an over-the-counter pill really turn an ordinary tomato into a superhero? Again, we used 2 groups of plants. One group was regularly sprayed with an aspirin solution, 1 tablet per 5 litres of water, every 1.5 to 2 weeks. The second group received no medicinal support whatsoever. To ensure a fair test, we intentionally created conditions favourable for fungal growth in the greenhouse, slightly elevated humidity and less than ideal ventilation. So, what did we see? Absolutely nothing. Zip. Nada. Zero. When the time came, the first signs of late blight appeared on both groups almost simultaneously. The aspirin vaccination offered our plants no discernible protection. What's more, after the drops dried, the leaves of the treated group showed faint whitish spots, which at higher concentrations could potentially cause burns. So what's the catch? Firstly, the acetyl salicylic acid from a tablet isn't quite the same as the pure hormone produced by the plant itself. Secondly, even if some stimulation does occur, it's so negligible that it simply can't stand up to a real infection. Effective disease prevention primarily comes down to proper watering, good air circulation, and healthy soil, not spraying plants with pills. The verdict: aspirin for plant immunity is, for the most part, a placebo effect for the gardener themselves. You do something and you believe it helps. In reality, you're just wasting your time and your aspirin. Myth busted. Next up, we have myth number 4. Perhaps the sweetest one of all: sugar for sweeter fruits. The logic behind this hack seems foolproof. Want sweeter tomatoes, watermelons, or strawberries? Just give them some sugar. Online gurus suggest either sprinkling sugar around your plants or watering them with a sugary solution. The idea is that the roots will absorb this glucose directly, sending it straight to the fruits and making them taste like honey. For this experiment, we chose strawberries. We regularly watered 1 patch once a week with a sugary solution. 1 tablespoon of sugar per litre of water. A neighbouring control patch received only plain water. Once the berries ripened, we conducted a blind taste test. And the result? No difference in taste whatsoever. The berries from both patches were equally sweet, with their sweetness determined more by sunlight exposure and timely watering. None of our tasters could tell which strawberries had been on the sugar diet. But that's not all. We noticed something else. The patch we watered with sugar attracted significantly more ants. The sweet syrup drew them in from all over the garden. And as we all know, where there are ants, aphids often follow. Let's understand why this doesn't work. Plants do indeed use sugars for nourishment. However, they don't absorb them in ready-made form through their roots from the soil. Instead, they produce their own sugars through photosynthesis, utilizing light, water, and carbon dioxide. When you pour sugar into the soil, you're not feeding the plant. You're feeding soil, microorganisms, fungi, and, as in our case, attracting pests. In the worst-case scenario, excessive sugar can even disrupt the root system's function. Our verdict: the myth of feeding plants sugar for sweeter fruits is complete nonsense. The flavour of your fruits and vegetables depends on the variety, sunlight, and proper horticultural practices, not on the contents of your sugar bowl. This method is not only useless but can also create additional problems with pests. Now let's talk about the arch nemesis of every tomato grower, late blight, and myth number 5, milk and whey as a cure-all for this dreaded disease. This advice has been passed down through generations. The recipes vary. Some suggest diluting milk with water, others recommend using milk whey, sometimes with a drop of iodine to boost the effect. The idea, they claim, is that lactic acid bacteria create an environment hostile to the fungus on the leaves, and the fatty film from milk supposedly physically prevents late blight spores from germinating. We decided to put this old wives' tale to the test in real-world conditions. We had 2 tomato beds planted outdoors. The weather was humid, perfect for late blight to flourish. We diligently sprayed the first bed after every rain with a solution of milk whey and water, diluted 1 to 10. The second, our control group, we left to its own devices, hoping only for the plant's natural immunity. So what happened? Well, unfortunately, late blight doesn't read gardening forums. It arrived on both beds, and its spread was practically identical. Our milky defense couldn't stop the disease. The leaves blackened, and we had to quickly apply real proven fungicides to save at least some of the harvest. Let's break down why this doesn't work. Firstly, lactic acid bacteria on the leaf surface are very short-lived. The first good rain, or even heavy dew, washes them away without a trace. Secondly, that protective film is a myth. It's so thin and unstable that it can't serve as a serious barrier against aggressive fungal spores. What's more, milk and whey are proteins, an excellent breeding ground, and instead of protecting against late blight, you risk encouraging the development of other issues on the leaves, such as sooty mould. The verdict: using milk and whey against late blight is simply fooling yourself. This method provides no real protection. Effective late blight prevention involves proper agricultural practices, and if conditions are challenging, the timely application of specialised treatments, not products from your refrigerator. Next up, myth number 6. Banana peels as a super source of potassium. This piece of advice is incredibly popular with organic gardening enthusiasts. You've likely come across videos where bloggers enthusiastically bury banana peels under roses, tomatoes, or peppers. They claim it's a fantastic, natural and free source of potassium, essential for blooming and fruiting. Some even go a step further, drying the peels, grinding them into a powder, or making infusions for watering. We decided to investigate just how much benefit these yellow skins actually offer. For our experiment, we chose rose bushes. Under one group of roses, we buried fresh banana peels, just as most instructions recommend. Under a second group, we used the powdered dried peels, and a third, control group, grew without any banana additives. We observed them throughout the entire blooming season. To be honest, the results weren't surprising. All 3 groups of roses bloomed exactly the same. There was no riot of colour, no explosion of blooms, promised by the banana peel advocates in the first 2 groups. Flower size, quantity, and bloom duration. Everything was within the normal range for that particular variety, without any noticeable deviations. So, what's the deal here? Yes, banana peels do contain potassium. However, there are 2 major caveats. Firstly, there isn't actually that much of it, far less than in even the simplest potassium fertilizer, like wood ash. Secondly, and most importantly, for that potassium to become available to the plant, the peel needs to completely decompose, to rot. This process can take months in the soil. When you bury fresh peels, you're essentially planting a ticking time bomb that might eventually work by the next season. And while it's decomposing, it can attract pests and even promote the growth of rot-inducing bacteria. Our verdict: banana peels as a potassium source? That's a myth with extremely low efficiency. There's practically no immediate benefit from them. It's far simpler and more reliable to use common wood ash or specialised mineral fertilizers for your potassium needs. As for banana peels, they're much better off in your compost pile, where over time they will truly become a part of beneficial fertilizer. Let's tackle myth number 7, coffee grounds as a soil amendment and pest deterrent. Coffee lovers, rejoice! The internet claims you shouldn't toss out those used coffee grounds. It's supposedly a magical 3-in-1 solution. First, it's said to make soil looser and more aerated. Second, it supposedly acidifies the soil, which benefits plants like hydrangeas and blueberries. And third, its scent is believed to deter pests such as slugs, snails, and even ants. We gathered a fair amount of dried coffee grounds and set out to test all 3 claims. To test its loosening effect, we incorporated coffee grounds into one carrot bed, leaving an adjacent bed untouched as our control. For the repelling effect, we sprinkled a ring of grounds around several hosta plants, a favourite snack for slugs. So, what did we find? Let's start with soil aeration. After just a few waterings, the coffee grounds in the soil compacted into a dense crust. This actually prevented air from reaching the roots, doing the exact opposite of what was promised. As for acidification, yes, fresh grounds are acidic. However, once used, they become almost neutral. To significantly alter soil pH, you wouldn't need kilograms, you'd need tons. Finally, the pests. Slugs and snails crawled right over our coffee ground barriers with complete indifference, continuing to feast on the hosta leaves. The scent didn't bother them in the slightest. Why does this happen? Coffee grounds are an extremely fine organic material. Dry, they resemble dust, but when wet, they clump together like cement. Instead of creating structure, they clog the pores in the soil. And regarding the smell, well, it seems those delicate pest noses aren't quite as sensitive as we'd hoped. The only benefit of coffee grounds is their slow decomposition into compost. But even then, they need to be added in very small quantities and thoroughly mixed with other organic matter. The verdict: coffee grounds as a universal garden remedy is a highly exaggerated myth. They don't loosen soil, they compact it. They barely affect soil acidity and certainly don't deter pests. Their best use is in the compost pile, not directly in your garden beds. Up next in our collection is myth number 8, eggshells as a calcium source. It's an age-old piece of advice. Every seasoned gardener knows the drill. Don't toss those eggshells. Collect, dry, grind them up, and sprinkle them on your garden beds, especially around tomatoes to ward off blossom end rot. After all, blossom end rot is a classic sign of calcium deficiency. It all seems perfectly logical. Eggshells are packed with calcium carbonate, so if you add them to the soil, the plant gets the calcium it needs and problem solved. We diligently collected eggshells all winter long. Some we ground almost to a powder in a coffee grinder, while others we simply crushed into fine pieces with a mortar and pestle. We applied this powdered eggshell to one group of tomato plants at planting. The second group received the larger crushed pieces. A third group, our control, grew without any eggshell treatment. Then we waited. The results were entirely predictable for any agronomist, but they might surprise many home gardeners. Blossom, end rot, albeit in small amounts, appeared on the fruits of all 3 groups. We found absolutely no difference between the eggshell-treated plants and the control group. The plants simply didn't register our calcium supplement. So why is this the case? Eggshells are indeed almost pure calcium carbonate. However, it's an incredibly hard, highly stable chemical compound. For it to break down in the soil and become a form that plant roots can actually absorb, we're talking years, even decades. Even eggshells ground into the finest powder will sit in the soil, largely inert, for an extremely long time. When you see signs of calcium deficiency on your tomatoes, they need help, now, immediate assistance. They need fast-acting, readily available calcium, such as the solution of calcium nitrate. The verdict: eggshells as an emergency calcium source. That's an absolutely useless myth. It's a fertilizer with such a slow release rate that your crops simply won't benefit in time. The only practical uses for eggshells are either adding them to a compost pile for several years to break down, or using them sparingly as a soil amendment to help with drainage in potting mixes. But when it comes to blossom end rot, they definitely won't save your harvest. Here's myth number 9, straight from Grandma's medicine cabinet. Using Zelionka, or brilliant green antiseptic, on plant cuts. This practice is especially common when pruning trees, shrubs, or for instance, removing suckers from tomato plants. The logic is simple. If Zelionka disinfects a child's scraped knee, then it should do just as good a job disinfecting a wound on a plant, protecting it from infections, fungi, and bacteria. It's cheap, readily available, and seems like an easy solution. We decided to put this myth to the test on an apple tree during spring pruning. We made several cuts of identical diameter. One cut was treated with Zelionka. The second was treated with a specialised tree wound dressing, following proper horticultural guidelines. The third cut we left completely untreated to observe how it would heal naturally. Then, we closely monitored the regeneration process. What did we discover? The cut, treated with tree wound dressing, slowly and neatly began to close up at the edges with callus, a specialised plant tissue. The untreated cut also started to heal, albeit a little slower, and its surface dried out slightly. However, the cut we applied Zelionka to looked the worst of all. Its edges turned black, and the surrounding wood appeared to have suffered a chemical burn. The healing process on this particular cut was significantly slower than the others. So, what's the issue? Zelionka is an alcohol-based solution, and the alcohol is incredibly detrimental to living plant tissues. When you apply it to a fresh cut, you are literally cauterizing and killing living cells. The plant then has to expend additional energy to first recover from this chemical burn before it can even begin the healing process. While Zelionka does kill microbes on the surface, the price of this disinfection is significant damage to the plant itself. Modern tree wound dressings and balms, on the other hand, are alcohol-free. They create an elastic protective film that actually supports the regeneration process rather than hindering it. The verdict: using Zelionka to treat plant cuts is a harmful and counterproductive myth. You're not helping the plant. Instead, you're inflicting a chemical burn, which severely slows down the healing of its wound. For these purposes, there are specialised, plant-safe products specifically designed to promote healing and protect the plant. Zelionka is simply best left for human first aid. Myth number 10 is one of the most radical and dangerous, using salt as a weed killer. This advice often pops up in discussions on how to get rid of unwanted vegetation on pathways, in the cracks between paving stones, or even in vegetable gardens. The recipe is ridiculously simple. Sprinkle ordinary table salt on the weeds, or drench them with a strong saltwater solution. They'll quickly yellow and die. And it's true, they will die. But at what cost? We decided to put this risky experiment to the test on a small, specially designated plot. We heavily salted one section of a pathway that was densely overgrown with weeds. We left an adjacent section untreated as a control. The results were quick and impressive. Within just a couple of days, all the vegetation in the treated area had withered and dried up. It seemed like the method worked perfectly. But then the problems began. It rained. Some of the salt washed off the pathway and onto the edge of a nearby garden bed. Before long, the cultivated plants growing in that bed also started to yellow and wither. This resulted in what agronomists call soil salinization. Salt, or more precisely, sodium chloride, is a poison to most plants. It disrupts their water balance, prevents them from absorbing nutrients, literally drawing water out of their roots. Land once poisoned by salt becomes barren for many years. Nothing but the most tenacious weeds will grow there. Restoring the fertility of such soil requires years and immense effort. Essentially, by salting the earth, you are recreating, in miniature, the effect of ancient warfare, when victors would salt the lands of the vanquished to condemn them to starvation. The verdict? Salt does kill weeds, but it kills everything else too. It's a scorched earth method that turns fertile soil into a dead desert. This myth isn't just harmful, it's devastating for your garden. There are dozens of safe ways to control weeds, from manual pulling to using selective herbicides. Never, under any circumstances, use salt on your property unless you want to turn it into a salt flat. So, myth number 11, household soap for aphids. This is probably one of the oldest and most widespread folk remedies in pest control. Practically every home gardener has, at some point, grated a bar of brown soap, mixed it with water, and sprayed affected plants. It's widely believed that this soap solution is a cheap, accessible, and, most importantly, eco-friendly method that effectively eliminates aphids without harming the plant. We found a black currant bush whose young shoots were heavily infested with aphids and decided to put this method to the test. We prepared a classic solution, grated about 20-30 grams of traditional bar soap per litre of water and mixed it thoroughly. Then, we generously sprayed the affected branches, making sure that every single aphid was literally bathed in our solution. We left control branches equally infested, untouched. What did we observe the next day? The results were undeniable. Most of the aphids on the treated branches were dead. The pest colonies were significantly thinned out. The method truly worked. But how? There's no magic or complex chemistry involved here. The secret lies in a simple physical mechanism. As the soap solution dries, it forms a very thin film on the insect's body. This film clogs the spiracles, microscopic openings through which insects breathe. As a result, the aphids suffocate and die. Furthermore, the soap dissolves the waxy protective coating on the pest body, making it more vulnerable. However, this method also has its downsides. Firstly, it only works through direct contact. This means you must literally hit every single pest. Any aphids hiding on the underside of leaves will survive. Secondly, the solution can harm beneficial insects such as ladybugs. And thirdly, a solution that's too concentrated can burn young plant leaves. Verdict: household soap for aphids is not a myth. It's a functional contact method. It's effective against small pest populations and requires thorough application. However, it shouldn't be considered an absolutely safe panacea. Always pay close attention to the concentration, and remember that you can also harm the beneficial insects in your garden. Myth 12. Potassium permanganate, the all-purpose garden disinfectant. Potassium permanganate, often simply called permanganate, is another common relic from old-school gardening first aid kits. Its distinctive dark pink solution is frequently recommended for various garden tasks: drenching soil before planting for disinfection, soaking seeds to ward off diseases, and even spraying plants to combat powdery mildew. It seems to be widely perceived as a universal antiseptic, capable of wiping out any garden pest or pathogen. We decided to put 3 of the most popular uses of potassium permanganate to the test. First, we soaked 1 batch of cucumber seeds in its solution, while a control group was soaked in plain water. Second, we treated the soil in 1 seedling tray with the permanganate solution, leaving an identical tray with untreated soil as a comparison. And third, we sprayed a zucchini plant affected by powdery mildew, observing a nearby untreated plant as our control. So, what were the results? Starting with the seeds, germination rates in both groups were absolutely identical. The potassium permanganate had no discernible effect on either the speed or the percentage of sprouting. Next, the soil. After transplanting seedlings into both trays, we observed no difference in their development whatsoever. Isolated cases of damping off disease were noted in both treated and untreated containers. Finally, the powdery mildew. Spraying with permanganate produced only a very weak and temporary effect. The white fungal coating might have paled slightly, but it certainly didn't vanish, and within a few days the disease continued to spread with its original vigour. Why do we see these outcomes? Potassium permanganate is a powerful oxidizer, and yes, it does kill bacteria and fungi upon direct contact. However, the problem lies in its stability. Once it reaches the soil, it reacts almost instantly with organic matter and rapidly breaks down into inactive compounds. This makes it impossible to effectively disinfect any significant volume of soil. You're essentially just tinting the top layer. When soaking seeds, it might eliminate surface pathogens, but it's utterly ineffective against infections inside the seed. And for powdery mildew, the typical concentrations used are simply not strong enough to destroy the fungal mycelium that has already penetrated the plant's leaf tissues. The verdict: the effectiveness of potassium permanganate in the garden is vastly overstated. It functions as a weak and unstable antiseptic at best. For genuine seed treatment, effective soil disinfection, and robust disease control, there are modern, far more reliable, and specifically formulated products available. Potassium permanganate, in this context, is largely a relic of tradition rather than a truly effective gardening tool. Let's dive into myth number 13, a sharp-smelling one with some intriguing promises: using household ammonia as a nitrogen source. This tip is particularly popular for reviving yellowing cucumber plants or struggling seedlings. The logic is simple. Household ammonia is an aqueous solution of ammonia. Ammonia is a nitrogen compound. Nitrogen is the main element responsible for lush, green growth. Therefore, watering or spraying with an ammonia solution must be a quick and cheap nitrogen fertilizer. For our experiment, we selected 2 identical, somewhat sickly and pale green cucumber plants. We gave one a soil drench of household ammonia solution, 1 tablespoon per 10 litres of water. The other plant received a standard nitrogen fertilizer, urea, at the equivalent active ingredient concentration. So, what did we observe? The effect was undeniable, and it was fast. The cucumber treated with ammonia visibly greened up and showed new growth within just a couple of days. It seemed the myth was confirmed. However, the cucumber fertilized with urea also showed an identical, if not superior, result. It too became a vibrant dark green and began actively producing new leaves. So what's the hidden drawback? And should you really be reaching for that bottle of ammonia? The catch, however, lies in the details. Yes, household ammonia does contain nitrogen in a readily available ammoniacal form. Plants quickly absorb it, which explains the immediate visual impact. But there are several crucial buts. Firstly, ammonia is highly volatile. By the time you mix your solution, carry it to the garden and apply it, a significant portion of that nitrogen will have simply evaporated into the air. You'll be fertilizing the atmosphere, not your plants. Secondly, over-the-counter ammonia is an extremely unstable and diluted nitrogen source compared to any commercial fertilizer, such as ammonium nitrate or urea. And thirdly, incorrect dosing or accidental contact with leaves can lead to severe chemical burns, especially if the solution is too concentrated. The verdict: household ammonia can indeed serve as an emergency nitrogen boost. However, it's not so much a myth as it is an inefficient and wasteful use of a key nutrient. You're likely to get inconsistent results, lose most of the nitrogen to the air, and risk damaging your plants with chemical burns. Opting for specialized nitrogen fertilizers is far simpler, safer, and ultimately more cost-effective when you consider the actual nutrient delivery. Myth 14. Bread crusts as fertilizer. You've probably heard that you shouldn't throw away old bread. Instead, soak it, let it ferment, and then use the resulting liquid to water your garden beds. This is supposedly an organic fertilizer that incredibly stimulates fruit production. The logic seems simple enough. Bread contains carbohydrates and vitamins, and it's thought to promote the growth of beneficial microorganisms in the soil. To test this, we prepared a bread infusion, a fermented mixture of rye bread and water. We used this infusion to water one group of zucchini plants. Another group received plain water and standard fertilizer applications. And here's what we found. The zucchini watered with the bread infusion showed no noticeable advantage whatsoever. What's more, the infusion attracted a lot of insects, and even worse, it spread a rather unpleasant, sour smell throughout the entire garden bed. So, why doesn't bread fertilizer work? Remember what we discussed about yeast? It's a similar situation here. When you soak bread, you're creating an ideal breeding ground for yeast, mold, and various putrefactive bacteria. While these organisms do release some beneficial substances as they multiply, they also actively consume nutrients from the soil itself, competing with your plant's roots. The nitrogen and potassium found in bread are released very slowly, and most of it gets used up by the proliferating microorganisms. As a result, your plants don't receive significant nutrition, and you're left with a garden bed that smells like fermenting brew and attracts pests. The verdict: using bread crusts as fertilizer is a very weak and questionable method. Its benefits are minimal, while the risks associated with attracting pests and fostering putrefactive microorganisms are quite high. Old bread is better off being given to animals or added to a compost pile, but definitely not used for direct watering. The 15th myth sounds quite scientific and modern: hydrogen peroxide for root aeration. Proponents claim that if you've overwatered a seedling or a houseplant, you should immediately water it with a hydrogen peroxide solution. The logic behind this is that upon contact with soil, hydrogen peroxide breaks down into water and atomic oxygen. This oxygen supposedly aerates the waterlogged soil, saving suffocating roots from rotting. Furthermore, hydrogen peroxide is also recommended for spraying plants to disinfect them and stimulate growth. We decided to put this to the test with tomato seedlings. We deliberately overwatered 2 pots until the soil was swampy. After 24 hours, when the plants had already drooped and were clearly suffering from lack of air, we poured a weak solution of pharmacy-grade peroxide into 1 pot, 2 tablespoons per litre of water. The second pot was left undisturbed. We simply stopped watering it. What did we observe? The plant treated with peroxide did indeed perk up slightly. Its leaves lifted a bit. However, the plant in the control pot also began to recover as soon as the top layer of soil dried out a bit. There was a difference, but it wasn't dramatic. A chemical reaction does occur. When watered, the soil slightly fizzes, releasing oxygen, but this oxygen is sufficient for only a few minutes to aerate a tiny volume of soil around the roots. This doesn't solve the main problem: excess water in the pot. In addition, hydrogen peroxide is a strong oxidizer. It not only kills harmful anaerobic bacteria, but also all beneficial soil microflora that helps roots absorb nutrients. With regular use, you risk making the soil sterile and lifeless, and spraying leaves with the wrong concentration can easily cause chemical burns. The verdict: hydrogen peroxide might provide a temporary resuscitative effect for an overwatered plant, but it's not a cure-all. It doesn't replace proper watering practices and good drainage. It should only be used in emergency situations, not on a regular basis. It's more like an electroshock for the plant than a medicine. It's much more effective to simply loosen the soil and let it dry out. Up next is myth number 16, a rather fragrant and seemingly promising one: the onion peel infusion, cure-all for pests. This humble concoction of onion peels is often touted as a gentle universal insecticide and fungicide. They say its pungent smell scares off aphids, spider mites, and even carrot flies, while the phytoncides within are supposed to suppress fungal diseases. The recipe is straightforward. Steep the peels in boiling water, let it infuse, strain, and then spray anything that needs protecting. We prepared a concentrated onion peel infusion and decided to put it to the test against 2 of a gardener's worst enemies: aphids, which were attacking young rose shoots, and spider mites, which had started to appear on our greenhouse eggplants. We generously sprayed the affected plants, making sure to hit the pests directly and coat the undersides of the leaves. So, what were the results? Let's start with the aphids. Immediately after spraying, some insects were probably just washed away by the force of the liquid itself. But by the next day, the surviving aphids were happily continuing their feast. We observed no deterrent or lethal effect on the colony whatsoever. With the spider mites, the story was even more disappointing. These pests showed absolutely no reaction to our fragrant treatment. They continued spinning their webs and sucking the life out of the eggplant leaves as if nothing had happened. So, why doesn't it work? While phytoncides found in onions do possess antibacterial properties, they are incredibly volatile and unstable. In a watery infusion, their concentration is simply too low to inflict any significant damage on insects or fungi. The repellent scent, which is supposed to ward off pests, dissipates in literally an hour or so. The only real benefit of onion peel infusion is a very mild foliar feed of micronutrients, specifically carotene, which gives the concoction its beautiful golden colour. But as a protective measure, it's an extremely weak, practically ineffective solution. The verdict: onion peel infusion as a pest and disease control method is a myth. Its effectiveness is practically zero. Don't waste your time preparing it in the hope of protecting your garden. Far more potent methods are required to combat aphids and spider mites. Myth number 17 is the straightforward, seemingly foolproof, yet radical idea: using boiling water against ants and weeds. This method often appears to be the epitome of efficiency. Why bother with chemicals when simple physics will do? Spot an anthill or a patch of stubborn weeds, boil a kettle, and pour the scalding water over them. It promises instant death for anything living in the immediate vicinity. It's cheap, fast, and, at first glance, environmentally friendly. We decided to put this method to the test on an anthill in the middle of our lawn and on a section of pathway overgrown with dandelions. We carefully poured boiling water over both the anthill and the weeds, taking care not to harm any cultivated plants nearby. The outcome was predictable and quite brutal. The weeds were instantly cooked, their leaves turning dark and wilting. Ants caught in the scalding water perished. Problem solved, or so it seemed. But what happened next? Where the anthill once stood, a large patch of scorched dead grass appeared on the lawn. It took a long time to restore the lawn in that spot, and the dandelions, despite their visible parts dying off, started regrowing within a couple of weeks from their powerful, deeply embedded roots. The boiling water simply couldn't penetrate the soil deep enough to kill them completely. But the most significant damage from this method lies hidden beneath the surface. Boiling water is not a selective weapon. It kills everything, both harmful and beneficial soil inhabitants, earthworms that aerate the soil, beneficial microorganisms that break down organic matter and make nutrients available to plants, all perish within the treated area. You end up with a completely sterile, dead patch of soil that will take a very long time to regain its natural fertility. The verdict: boiling water undeniably kills everything it touches, but it's a carpet-bombing method that causes immense collateral damage to your garden's ecosystem. It's ineffective against weeds with deep root systems and detrimental to soil fertility. This myth is a prime example of how a seemingly simple solution can lead to much bigger problems. Our 18th myth takes us away from chemistry and physics, delving instead into the realm of astrology. We're talking about planting by the moon calendar. Millions of gardeners worldwide consult the moon's phases when planning their planting. The belief is that plants sown during a waxing moon will develop their above-ground parts, stems, leaves and fruits, more vigorously. Conversely, those planted during a waning moon are thought to direct all their energy into the roots, which is ideal for root crops. There are entire Talmuds, detailed guides, that meticulously outline each day when to sow, when to thin out seedlings, when to weed, and even when to avoid your garden beds altogether. To put this to the test, we decided to conduct a pure scientific experiment. We chose radish seeds, a crop known for its rapid growth cycle. We divided them into two absolutely identical batches. The first batch was sown on the most favourable day according to the lunar calendar, during a waxing moon under a fertile zodiac sign. The second batch was sown on a categorically unfavourable day, during a waning moon under a barren sign. All conditions for both plots were identical: the same soil, consistent watering, and equal lighting. We meticulously monitored the plant's development, recording the speed of germination, measuring the size of their leaf rosettes, and finally, harvesting the crop right on schedule. And what do you think happened? The results were absolutely identical. We found no statistically significant difference in germination rates, growth speed, or the size and weight of the root crops. The radishes planted on the bad day were just as good as those planted according to all the rules of lunar agriculture. So why is this the case? The moon's gravitational pull on Earth is real. It causes tides, for instance. However, the idea that this same gravity could significantly influence the movement of sap in a tiny seed or plant finds no scientific backing whatsoever. Far greater influence on a future harvest comes from entirely earthly factors: seed quality, soil fertility, temperature, humidity, and timely care. Our verdict: the lunar planting calendar for gardeners is a myth, based on belief rather than facts. It can certainly serve as a convenient organizer, helping you plan your tasks. If planting by the moon gives you peace of mind, then by all means, continue. But understand that the decisive factor for your harvest won't be the position of the night sky's luminary, but rather your hard work and proper agricultural techniques. Myth number 19. Marigolds, the ultimate pest repellent. These vibrant, low-maintenance flowers are often hailed as the garden's natural pest control, or little helpers. Many gardeners advise planting them around the perimeter of beds, or interspersed with crops like potatoes, cabbage, and strawberries. The popular belief is that the distinctive scent from their roots deters nematodes, those tiny soil worms that wreak havoc on crop root systems. They're also widely believed to keep away wireworms, Colorado potato beetles, and even moles. So we decided to put these protective claims to the test, focusing on two common problem crops. First up was a potato bed that had suffered a severe wireworm infestation the previous year. We densely surrounded it with marigolds, planting them both around the edges and between the potato rows. Our second test subject was a strawberry patch, which had clear signs of nematode damage. Here too we planted marigolds between the berry plants. For comparison, control beds of the same crops were left completely marigold-free. When autumn arrived, we assessed our findings. The potato yield from the marigold-protected bed showed precisely the same level of wireworm damage as our control bed. Clearly, the wireworms paid no mind to the fragrant flowers. As for the strawberries, the nematode-infested plants remained stunted and produced a weak harvest, completely unaffected by their sanitizing neighbors. Even Colorado potato beetles seemed to ignore the floral borders, happily flying right over them to feast on the potato plants. So, what's the real story here? There is a grain of truth to this myth. Certain varieties of marigolds, primarily the small flowered types, do release compounds called thiophenies from their roots. These are indeed toxic to specific kinds of nematodes. However, there are two critical caveats. Firstly, for this effect to work, marigolds need to be grown as a cover crop. This means the entire bed must be densely sown with them for a full growing season. Only after that should their green plant matter be tilled back into the soil. It's only then that the concentration of these beneficial compounds reaches a level potent enough to actually suppress the pests. Simply scattering a few marigold plants around the edges of a garden bed or between rows has virtually no effect whatsoever. Secondly, the scent of marigolds simply doesn't deter pests like wireworms or Colorado potato beetles in any meaningful way. Verdict: the idea of marigolds acting as a living barrier against pests is largely an exaggerated myth. Their mere presence as a decorative border won't safeguard your harvest. Any real impact against nematodes only comes from using them as a dedicated cover crop, a process that requires time and often a separate bed for that specific purpose. And finally, rounding out our myth-busting marathon, we have myth number 20, perhaps the most meditative of all: tapping tomato plants for better pollination. This piece of advice is a classic in greenhouse cultivation. The theory goes that in enclosed environments where there's no wind and few pollinating insects, pollen struggles to naturally transfer from the anthers to the pistil. To assist this process, growers are often advised to walk through their greenhouses every morning, gently shaking the flower clusters or lightly tapping the trellises to which the plants are tied. Naturally, we decided to put this morning ritual to the test. In our greenhouse, we designated 2 rows of tomato plants for the experiment. Every morning, for the first row, we played the role of a gentle breeze, carefully shaking each flowering cluster. The second row was left entirely undisturbed, relying solely on natural air movement and self-pollination. We diligently monitored how fruit set developed on each cluster, and here's where we encountered a pleasant surprise. Unlike most of the previous myths we've busted, this one actually worked, and it worked quite dramatically. The plants we shook produced noticeably more fruit. Their clusters were full, with virtually no empty blossoms or blanks, those flowers that failed to develop into fruit. In contrast, the control plants had significantly more unpollinated flowers and gaps in their fruit development. So why the difference? It all comes down to the unique structure of the tomato flower. Tomato flowers are hermaphroditic and self-pollinating, meaning they possess both male and female reproductive organs and can fertilize themselves with their own pollen to set fruit. The pollen develops within the anthers, which form a protective cone around the pistil. For pollination to occur, the pollen simply needs to be released from this cone and fall onto the stigma of the pistil, which is located inside, and that's precisely where vibration comes into play. In nature, wind provides this essential vibration. In commercial greenhouses, this task is often handled by specially introduced bumblebees or mechanical vibrators. But in our humble home garden greenhouse, we successfully fulfilled this vital role ourselves. The verdict: this is no myth. It's a proven and effective horticultural technique. Gently tapping the trellis or lightly shaking the flower clusters genuinely helps to significantly increase fruit set in greenhouse conditions, or even during calm, windless weather on a balcony. It's a simple, free, and surprisingly potent method. Now let's dive into the most astonishing results of our research. What truly shocked us was the effect of fertilizing with yeast. Plants fed with yeast not only didn't outperform the others, they actually looked weaker and more stunted. This is because as yeast works in the soil, it actively consumes potassium and calcium, essentially robbing your plants of vital nutrients. Instead of nourishing them, you're creating a nutrient deficit. Another surprising turn came with iodine. While plants do need it in tiny microdoses, the couple of drops per bucket advice often recommended online is a total gamble. Just a little too much, and you end up with toxic root burn, which is exactly what we observed in several of our test subjects. The plant's growth halts, and it spends its energy trying to survive instead of yielding a harvest. So, what actually does work? Surprisingly, one of the simplest methods proved to be the most effective: a basic soap solution against aphids. It's not magic, it just mechanically washes off the pests and clogs their breathing pores. It's cheap, simple, and effective, especially when used proactively. This goes to show that sometimes straightforward physical solutions are far more effective than complex gardening alchemy. Our main conclusion is straightforward. Not everything you see trending online is beneficial for your garden. Often, behind attractive promises lies a fundamental misunderstanding of basic biology and chemistry. Before you start pouring household items onto your garden beds, it's always better to stick to tried and true gardening techniques. Thank you for sticking with us through this entire investigation. If you found this format insightful and want more honest evaluations, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our upcoming videos. Now for a question for you. What's the strangest or most useless gardening tip you've ever heard? Let us know in the comments below, and together, let's create a collection of the most unbelievable gardening myths.